Hi, today I'm going to talk to you about how to create perspective sketches. Although very similar to the other two pictorials, oblique and isometric, they are slightly different. They're more of how the human eye sees the world. First thing I'm going to show you is just a few examples and some ideas of what you should keep in mind. What you'll find is that, again, I have quite a few steps. Step one is all about creating that horizon line. You can see an example of a horizon line right here. This would be where your eye lays in the real world. You can add vanishing points as necessary. You'll notice that with a one-point perspective, there's only one vanishing point for the object, as only one set of lines converge to that point. Step two would be to create a box method. We'll then grid off the box, but I'll show you that when I create some sketches. Step three would be to create any surface faces or edges. Again, gridding off the box will help a lot with that. So part of that step will also be to delineate edges on the surface as necessary. Step four is all about creating those interior faces and edges. And step five would be to delineate the interior edges and faces. Now, to do this, having the grid method helps significantly because it means that we have all of the points needed to reference a three-dimensional object with this grid. So step six, the tonal shading, will come at the very end, and we'll not really use the grid for this, and at this point we'll have erased pretty much everything other than the object lines for the exterior or surface faces and the interior edges and faces. I have a few guidelines here, things to remember. For example, this is always how the human eye sees the world, so they are the most realistic of pictorial sketches. What makes them kind of difficult to sketch for some people? A one-point perspective, you need to remember that it's a straight-on view, much like how an oblique is. The horizon is horizontal, but so are the width lines. Vertical lines are what we'll consider our height lines, and then depth lines will be lines that move at an angle dependent upon the object's location relative to the vanishing points. But those lines always converge in a one-point perspective. They seemingly meet at that vanishing point. Some students will refer to this as vanishing lines, but they are converging lines. They converge on point. Two-point perspectives are always drawn from a corner edge. Now, be careful with this. I don't mean that they're drawn from a corner point. That would be a three-point perspective. So you'll notice when we go over this that they're drawn from a corner edge so that all of my vertical lines are parallel to each other. Now, this is pretty typical that I would have vertical lines as my height lines and width and depth lines converging. However, I will show you one example of how that can be different. Three-point perspective is all about the corner point being shown, and the height, width, and depth lines all seem to converge. These are always similar to either obliques for 1 point or isometrics for 2 and 3 points. Remember to always use a straight edge and always have that sharpened pencil. All right, so a couple of examples. Here you'll see a horizon line with a vanishing point, and then I've decided how far over to the right I'm going to draw the front face of the box. Now this example is a very simple object. It's just a basic cube, nothing real detailed about it. So it was easy to draw. Once I've decided where I'm going to start that box, I'm then going to move over for the width and back up. I'll decide how deep to draw it as well. Once I decide how deep to draw it, I can then put in any of the lines needed for tonal shading. The tonal shading lines can be a little challenging for some students. You'll notice that on the front face for this object, I opted to draw vertical lines for the tonal shade layer. Now they could be horizontal lines because in this case with a 1-point perspective, the front view has both height and width. Now on the right side, I chose to make it a little more darker, a little brighter on the front, darker on the right, and then blank on the top. But to get that darkness, I used 3 layers of tonal shading lines. You'll notice back here where I've left some of the vanishing lines, some of those lines that go back and converge to this vanishing point, that those lines, all of these, represent the lines that I used for my 3rd layer, the depth ones. I'll have vertical, horizontal, and depth lines that make those 3 layers on the right side. Now, that's the basics behind how to create a one-point perspective. This one-point perspective would show me a top, a front, and a left side view. Here, I'll see a top and a front, and I have vertical lines that represent my tonal shaded face on the front. Again, I only chose to do 1 layer for my value on the front. That is up to the designer, the person making the sketch. Here you'll see I chose to put the horizon line roughly through the middle of the object as if I were standing more in front of it. In this view, I see the top. In this view, I see the side. And in fact, I would see the right side on this one. Notice how the object is to the left of the vanishing point, creating this right side view. Here, I'll see that it's above it and right in the center. You'll also notice that with the 2-point perspectives, I've set them up in a couple of different fashions as well. One below the horizon line so that we can see the top. One right in the middle of the horizon line so that we don't see the top or the bottom. And then one set up so that we're looking at a corner edge that's horizontal instead of one that's vertical, like we see here. So in this case, I would see a side, another side, and a top. Here I'm only going to see the top and the front. Typically what we see is a top, front, right. So that's how I'll reference this one. You'll notice that the tonal shade lines follow the depth as well as following the width, all the way back to their vanishing points. Whereas the right side I left as just the vertical lines. Here, my front view is really weird with the tonal shading. Because the vanishing points are on either side of it and very close, it was really hard to separate the different types of lines. It does make it look darker, but it doesn't really make it look very good. Same thing happens down here with this one. Although the tonal shade lines do go to the vanishing points, and you'll notice that I no longer have vertical lines, but rather lines that converge to this vanishing point down here, it doesn't look as good as, say, one of these up here as far as their tonal shading goes. So that brings me down to my 3-point perspectives that I sketched. And again, providing you 3 different examples of them. One where the object is below the horizon line. And you'll notice that in this particular case, what I wind up with is my vertical lines are not really vertical. They are height lines, but they're drawn so that they are converging to the 3rd vanishing point. So are my width and depth lines. It makes this object look stretched in height. It's not really a cube anymore. It's almost as if I'm a bird flying over the top of the object. Now, the next one is drawn so that it looks as if I'm standing at about a 1/3 of the way up the object, maybe a 1/4. And it makes the top part look smaller, almost as if I'm a worm crawling up to this object. This object, being that it is above the horizon line and I can see below it, appears to be more like a giant monolithic spaceship flying over the top of you. Again, more like a person looking up underneath something. You'll notice that with all of these objects, whether it be a 1, 2, or 3-point perspective, any line moving toward the vanishing point does converge, and at the same time, it makes that feature as it moves back in depth in a 1-point, back in depth and width in a 2-point, or in all 3 directions, height, width, and depth in a 3-point, appear to get smaller as it moves away from us. This is the idea behind perspectives. It's how the human eye sees the world, and as I look, say, down a long hallway lines will seemingly converge together. They will start to appear smaller in the distance when they outline a particular feature. Next video, I'm going to show you how to draw an object that's a little more familiar, something more like a puzzle cube part. This one, in fact. And I'll draw it as a 1-point perspective and then a 2-point.